And we are back to help unlock the power of salutogenesis with Jasen. How are you, Jasen?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Good as well. And I'm really excited about today's topic because this is not our usual track, but I think it is a much needed track. We want to talk about this very dearly, to say so.
Yeah, no, I think DeSci is an interesting development in the world for sure.
Yeah, I think more so because I think we are at this juncture where the trust levels are so low in institutional setups, both in health system and how the whole pharma cycle works and how the funding and how the research works. And, and so this is kind of gives hope, but also gives a real alternative to people that, oh, this is possible. So just so everyone is listening, we're talking about the decentralizing the drug development process and how DeSci could change medicine forever. That's like the whole thing today we'll talk about. So let's start with the very basic. Jason, what is DeSci?
Okay, so most people have at least heard of crypto, even if they think it's just imaginary money that for like online gamblers and I guess to be honest, half of the headlines haven't really helped that. But the real breakthrough wasn't the coins themselves. It was kind of the tech underneath them, the blockchain and smart contracts. That's what gave us DeFi, or decentralized finance. Instead of banks and Wall Street calling the shots, DeFi lets people kind of transact directly. And codes or code set in the rules, or it sets the rules for what happens, not the gatekeepers themselves. So not the banks. So imagine buying a house today, right? There's kind of endless paperwork. There's that escrow limbo, and waiting around for someone to fax the last page to you. All sorts of junk. With smart contracts, once the inspection and appraisal are uploaded, the deal kind of just closes itself automatically and transparently. And what used to take, weeks to months could take days. DeSci, or decentralized science, borrows that same engine, but applies it to science and medicine. Instead of pharma or pharma grants and different grant committees deciding what research gets done, communities can fund it directly. Intellectual property can be tokenized, and decisions kind of now happen in the open, and access rules get kind of hardwired from the start. So where DeFi streamlined money, DeSci could do the same for medicine, cutting out the middleman, and kind of surfacing better ideas faster, and letting the people most affected actually shape what gets built.
And you said faster, transparent, and probably cheaper as well, because you cut out the middlemen out of this thing. So what is the promise of DeSci compared to current system? Can you compare those two, please?
Sure. So science today is really slow, and you're right, it's expensive, and it's fenced off by kind of that handful of gatekeepers, right? Those being, pharma, the grant panels, maybe journals. They control what gets studied, also how it's spun, and what actually ends up reaching patients if we're talking about medicine. So right now it takes about, 10 plus years and a couple $1 billion to get a drug or significant new therapy to market. That's if you're lucky and well connected, right? DeSci says, what if we could do it in 2 years for a few million with a community instead of a conglomerate? So DeSci is really kind of flipping the script there. Communities fund the science that they care about. IP gets tokenized, and data lives transparently on a blockchain. That means faster timelines, so no more waiting years for grant cycles. Means lower costs. Small trials can actually be run on a shoestring budget comparatively, and it means better access because you can kind of bake affordability and equity into the IP itself. And don't worry, that's not the kind of equity or this discussion won't trigger Republican-controlled Senate hearings or something. But I guess and maybe the most radical shift is that transparency. So in a DeSci system, raw data is public and tamper-proof. And that's a far cry from today, where whoever owns the data controls the story that it gets that gets told to the public. In the current system, right, blind trust isn't just tolerated; it's kind of engineered into the system. So DeSci strips that away. You don't have to trust the summary. You can actually go and check the data yourself. And then the whole kind of, trust the science becomes kind of obsolete when the science is open. This is really similar to open source software. People used to think that, especially in with security code, that's got to be secret, right? Turns out when it's open, thousands of developers worldwide dig into it. They find bugs and flag vulnerabilities, and that then makes the whole system stronger. So science can work in the same way. Data nerds and clinicians and skeptics all kind of keeping each other honest.
Yeah, it's definitely very much synonymous to open source software in the word comparable. And I think one part is obviously faster, cheaper, transparent to everyone, but the second part is also decision making and community, right? It's like not one individual or entity is now owning everything. And that's a big thing. This is where we have created more problems in healthcare or health system or drug research or even pharma, right? So, and so it's definitely takes that community driven involvement, and that changes and that brings more transparency and better result after all with all these. What about the benefit to the contributors? Like in open source system, there are even those are incentivized either in terms of, there are many ways, gamification or access or things like that, even in open source software world or science world that happens. So what about DeSci and what about their ROI, the contributors benefit?
Sure. That's a really important question, right? And it was something that my partner actually struggled with for a long time. It was basically kept coming back. Well, why would anyone put money into this? What is their benefit? But something wasn't making sense to him, right? So really, most of the time, a DeSci token doesn't equal direct ownership of IP or any IP that gets created. The DAO, which is the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, DAO, owns the IP, and any returns like licensing fees or royalties or something like that actually goes back into the treasury of the DAO to fund more research. So most DAOs avoid paying out dividends or something like that. So the tokens aren't really securities. And that's what they want to stay away from is securities laws. What token holders get is governance power. So they get to vote on what gets funded, who gets into a trial, or which condition to tackle next. So I guess you think of this kind of like a homeowners association, except you're deciding which therapies get funded instead of which bushes get trimmed. There's also an indirect upside, right? If the DAO builds a reputation for funding meaningful science, demand for that token usually grows. Some people are buying the token hoping it appreciates, but most aren't just speculators. They're actually showing up because they care about the science, the outcome, or maybe even getting early access to something that could help them or someone that they love. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
And And would you say that, what about the, I guess, outcomes, right? Like there are outcomes specific, not just access. And the holders carry the outcomes. Is that how that works too? Like, how do you control, like, how it is going to be used in application in the real world? Would that decision making also be in the hands of people who own tokens, or that's not, the DAO decides that?
It can be. And I understand kind of stumbling over how to even ask some of these questions because this is such a new concept. It's difficult to, I mean, there are lots of things that don't quite make sense and it's hard to ask those questions. I think what you're asking about is how this kind of democratizes the science,
Yeah.
and what that really means, right? So it is kind of changing who holds the keys there, right? Right now, if pharma or a grant committee says no, the research dies, period. In a democratized model, the people who actually live with the problem, that's whether they're patients, caregivers, frontline clinicians, whomever, they can pool resources and then fund what they believe in. Ownership changes as well, for sure. Instead of locking up the rights in kind of one company's vault, the IP becomes a tokenized digital asset that the community can govern. Now, remember, it's the DAO likely owns it, but the community and the token holders govern it. So think NFTs, but instead of those, the cartoon monkeys, it's the rights to a therapy or even a regulatory approval. So access it gets smarter with all of this. Right now, U.S. prices can be 100 times higher than elsewhere, and you don't have to be Karl Marx or Bernie Sanders to see the problem with charging $20,000 for something that costs $2 to make. That's not innovation. That's opportunism. Even in a democratized system, the most favored nation pricing is pretty unrealistic. But you could peg pricing to local GDP or wages or something like that, building fairness into the model from day one. And again, transparency is the kicker here. Companies spin headline numbers while burying the details they don't like, right? We saw it during COVID, the whole 95% effective became a slogan. While the actual efficacy risks, or the actual efficacy and the risks and limitations all kind of trickle out months later. In DeSci, the raw data is public. No spinning, no hiding, because really, he who owns the data writes the story, right? DeSci puts the pen back in the public's hand.
Yeah. And would you, I guess, how does Ionic Alliance fit into this movement or this scenario?
Well, I actually think that Eyeball, ion biotechnology aqueous ligands, for people who haven't been listening to all the other episodes, it's not just a poster child for DeSci here. It's really kind of this unicorn that nobody noticed. It's a new theory, a working product, and a model that's actually fundable now, not in the biotech dog years, years and years later. So first we've got the science, and that is the microimmune dynamics. Kind of reframes how we think about disease. Instead of chasing symptoms downstream, it looks upstream. How cells behave under stress, how local nutrients or local nutrient deficits kind of warp the local immune responses, and how rebalancing the ions locally can restore terrain. That's a testable hypothesis, which is a perfect fit for DeSci's kind of milestone-based funding. Second, we've got the platform. This isn't just one antimicrobial gel. It's an entirely new category, ion-based salutogenic medicine, a field built on restoring terrain, not overriding it. And it doesn't stop at the wound care. We're talking autoimmune, cancer prevention, even aging. And tokenizing the IP means that community doesn't just there's not just one study for them to back. They can help shape an entire kind of therapeutic frontier. And unlike most stakeholders in pharma, the community actually cares if it works. And third, we're not just theorizing all of this. The ion gel, or more formally, ion gel Lithium-25, is already approved as a class 2 medical device. It stopped infections and saved limbs where standard of care failed. Imagine funding the next approval, like a 510K or getting the CE mark via decentralized science. Then turning that regulatory milestone into an IP NFT. That's not just a thought experiment. That's kind of shovel ready. And, so it seems like Eyeball gives DeSci something it hasn't had yet, right? Proof that it can move forward beyond theory and actually take things into the clinic.
Yeah. And it seems like for typical candidates for DeSci, this is already more proven. And it's makes it an attractive candidate or ideal candidate or something like this.
Well, yeah. I mean, everything else at this point, decentralized science is pretty early as well. So all of the science that it is funding is also very, very early. So it's going to be years before really any of that can really start helping people. Even if decentralized science can make things and shrink the cycle times and make things a lot faster, it's still going to take a long time. And even then, as we were discussing earlier, to really take new things and get them to people is still going to take a long time and be really expensive. And decentralized science can raise, maybe millions of dollars, but probably not billions of dollars. And to get really impactful drugs to market is taking billions of dollars. So decentralized science is still, with the early research, even if it's really positive, they're going to have to find somebody to purchase it from them. And then when that happens, the DAO, which has some ownership of that IP, is going to get, license payments or royalties or something along those lines. So it can continue funding more things, but now it's still going to be it's still going to take pharma in the end to get it out to people. And that's where we can short circuit all of this, because we already have an approved product. We've already taken it all the way. But we also know that we can take the exact same platform and do lots more with it.
Yeah. So I guess the point to emphasize here is most of the DeSci candidates or products, they probably go through this cycle where they get initial funding there, but they still need hand-holding from pharma side. After they're run through initial rounds through DeSci, you get them to the market. But Eyeball is in this special condition right now where even that part is figured out, because there is already a product in the market, and you can totally bypass in that way to not worry about that.
And to be fair, I guess, so there are some DeSci programs where they're taking other already approved drugs and combining them to do different things. That's going to be a lot faster than creating a brand new drug. But that's all still kind of just using what already exists there. And okay, yeah, on one hand, this is going to do a new thing. It might be better than what we had in the past when you're combining things together. So there are some other pathways. I guess pathways is the best word. There's some other pathways for other DeSci projects to get out to people as well. But again, I come back to, we've got the science, the platform, and the product all bundled into one. And then we can split off into lots of different pathways, knowing that we've already done it.
Yeah. And let's talk about now the risks, though. So, what are the risks with DeSci?
All right. So I think that the biggest risk is that DeSci just ends up kind of rebranding the old system. If we use it to fund yet another decade of mouse studies that go nowhere, we've decentralized the hamster wheel, but we're still running in circles, right? We don't need a decentralized way to fund petri dish experiments that take 12 years and maybe prove a concept. We need tools that can help actual people with actual problems, this decade. If you look at some of the funded projects in the space, a lot of them kind of chase rare mutations or novel compounds and other kind of classic pharma moonshots. That's fine, but as we've talked about, it's also kind of slow, expensive, and still. I have to mention that still all of this is kind of locked into that cratogenic mindset, where you invent a new molecule or you take a couple other molecules and combine them together, so you've got something new, but then you force some mechanism and hope it works well. What we're trying to do with eyeball is different, right? Don't patch the mutation, prevent the chronic cellular stress that leads to it in the first place. Don't force autophagy, kind of support the mitochondria so that cells handle it naturally. And don't borrow cancer resistance from mole rats. There's actually a DeSci project doing exactly that. Just restore your own darn cells so they behave like they're supposed to. And DeSci could fund that kind of upstream thinking, but only if it's willing to. And otherwise, we're just using the shiny new tool to fund the same brittle reductionist stuff pharma already loves, but with a worse user interface.
Yeah. What has your experience been with DeSci so far?
Honestly, it's a little mixed. So DeSci really talks a big game about decentralizing science and breaking pharma's grip. But when we brought Eyeball, an actual product with, I guess Eyeball's not the product, but you know what I mean, an actual product with regulatory approval and a whole new therapeutic model, the reaction was kind of crickets. You'd think that they would leap at a chance to turn a real therapy into a community-governed asset. Instead of most of the energy still goes to tokenizing early stage papers or chasing exotic drug targets, or repurposing drugs in combination. And that's fine if you're in love with theory, but if DeSci wants to prove it can actually help people heal, it needs to engage with products like this. It's ironic. The movement built to break pharma's grip got quiet the second we showed up with something that could actually do it. Now, I guess for now, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and assume I just haven't spoken to the right people yet.
Yeah, but would this change your, I don't know, directionality on where you want to go this path with Eyeball? Any second thoughts, I guess?
Second thoughts? Well, you mean if DeSci doesn't actually deliver?
Yeah, it doesn't deliver, or if it fails, or...
Well, okay, so if it doesn't deliver, I don't think that that's going to be because the idea was wrong. It'll be because the execution got kind of hijacked by the same gatekeepers, just wearing new outfits. If DeSci does fail, it's not the only game in town, though. We tried the nonprofit route first. That didn't work. That was a little bit naive. The system's just too expensive for donations to kind of move the needle. But there are other models like equity crowdfunding. That's not charity. That's people saying, I want this to exist and I want a stake in it. We could crowdfund a 510K right now and give contributors some real world upside. Or I guess go simpler and co-ops and foundations or product-backed participation. I guess, fund the development and in return get governance access and price protections, perhaps. That's kind of, that is DeSci, I mean, it's the same thing, just without the crypto layer attached onto it. The big idea is this, right? That democratization isn't a trademark feature of DeSci. Any model that gives regular people a say in what gets built and how it's delivered, right? That's the win.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess what is your strategy for, eyeball and take it DeSci route?
So if we were to build DeSci around eyeball or take eyeball through DeSci, I'd start small, nothing flashy, just kind of a pilot project to test if the model actually works. That could mean validating the microimmune dynamics through early research and publishing a paper. This is, all that stuff is something that the DeSci crowd really values. And if that pilot delivers well, then we can go bigger and actually create an eyeball DAO. It wouldn't just fund one-off studies. It would actually, we'd have two tracks there, right? One would be guidance projects. And that's where that's kind of what you expect from I guess I should say conventional DeSci. Community-driven, milestone-driven, community-funded, milestone-driven research that answers those kind of big questions like, within eyeball, which ions matter the most, and how they affect local immune signaling or CDR progression, or what delivery routes work best. Those kind of projects build scientific credibility and would expand the whole platform. But then the other option would be also having ROI projects where we actually get a return on investment. And that's where things kind of get interesting, and it's where eyeball breaks from the usual DeSci model. These are initiatives with real commercial value, the regulatory filings or clinical trials or product approvals. And here's the key, right? It's that the returns from those projects can then go back to the people who funded them. So with an eyeball DAO, we would set up a way where both you can get governance and then also have a pathway to invest in projects that are actually going to have a return, and not just a return back into the DAO, but a return back to the people who would otherwise be token holders. Right. So in that case, we're not talking about just reputational clout here, or kind of this vague token appreciation. We're talking about actual financial upside distributed back to the contributors, not hoarded in the treasury of the DAO. And in other words, that's DeSci, I guess, with a working exit ramp. And how I would do that is to participate in those ROI projects. Token holders would need to stay engaged. So that means that they actually have to be voting and contributing and being part of governance, not just holding the token and hoping that it shoots up to the moon. That structure then rewards committed contributors, not just speculators. And this is really what makes eyeball unique. Most of DeSci is still in the kind of fund more papers phase. We're bringing something that already works, already has regulatory traction, and gives communities a way to both kind of shape the science and share in the rewards of.
Yeah. So it is not just, so it's governance as well as a pathway to maybe even equity, which is ownership in the company in different format. So that's possible through this.
Yes, but what's really interesting, and I'll say this again, right? So let's say you take the ion gel, we're bringing it to the US, and we want to get a 510K. So what we do is we can actually have DeSci fund, like let's say through an eyeball DAO. So a bunch of people buy the token, and then we use those funds to do the work to actually get a 510K. So now there's some value with that. And what we can do is we can tie a license back so that every time the product sells within the US based off of that 510K, some percentage goes back into a fund. And if it's just through the DAO itself, well, then that would go back into the treasury of the DAO. That's what's fairly normal. But what we were talking about doing is if we've got the tokens and people are putting money into the tokens to control the earlier science, that's where they have the governance. And if they're actually contributing, then we open up and we say, okay, we're going to fund getting a 510K. And whatever the contract is, you're going to get whatever. We'll take 5% of every sale, and it goes back into this fund, and then that fund gets split out based off of the ownership of people within that fund. And but the 510K actually becomes a tokenized asset. So that is the IP that has an NFT on it, right? So that is a non-fungible token. And that's what gets really interesting here, right? So, when people first started hearing about NFTs, it was mostly, all of those monkey or ape pictures, and you could, regardless of who put that up on their screen, if you owned the token for it, you owned that. And then you could always prove that because that's on a blockchain somewhere. The exact same thing is happening here, but now instead of some funny little ape picture, it's actually the 510K. So the approval. And with a smart contract underneath that can then, whenever money is made with that approval, some of that money can be forced back into whatever accounts or funds that are required for it to happen.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, it's basically based on 5 or 10. You basically start getting license, and you start getting royalties in a way back to the funds, and then based on the number of tokens, that becomes your return on your investment in the DAO.
Yeah. And I realize I throw 510K around a lot. That's actually the pre-market approval that's required in the United States by the FDA to sell a medical device. If that wasn't clear, I apologize if I didn't make that clear earlier. That's the regulatory approval you need to sell a medical device in the US.
Yeah. And okay, so I guess the last question is, if this works, and how would it look like 10 years out from now?
Okay, so DeSci works. I think that medicine in 10 years isn't just faster, it's fairer, smarter, and actually responsive. Today, as we talk about, it takes decades and billions to get a drug to market, mostly to please lawyers and investors, not patients. Good ideas and patients with them die because they don't fit that business model. And in the DeSci world, communities fund and govern research directly. Therapies reach people in years, not decades. Patients help shape the trials. Pricing isn't some kind of backroom guesswork. It's part of the code up front. Data isn't locked behind paywalls. It's logged transparently. Now, specifically for eyeball, I think that if this works, microimmune dynamics becomes a recognized framework. Ion-based medicines goes mainstream in wound healing, cancer, autoimmune disease, even disease prevention, and anti-aging. So medicine can actually start moving in a more salutogenic model, which is what we've kind of talked about as a dream of mine for a long time here. And access and pricing are built in, not dictated by whoever wins the next pharma arms race. And honestly, if the U.S. really wants to lead as the crypto capital in the world, and if the FDA really wants to restore public trust, put the whole drug development process on chain. Full transparency means no lobbyist spin. right? Resulting in backroom deals and stuff. No selective data releases, kind of pushing through ineffective or risky treatments. Just the truth and accountability in real time. That's kind of the vision. But it might only happen if we stop waiting for permission and start building it ourselves. In 10 years, medicine shouldn't be something handed down to us from those on high. It should be something everyone helps build transparently, locally, and collaboratively.
Is there any success story, that has done any? I'm just putting you on the spot, but if you know anyone, any company who's done that successfully to some level.
With DeSci? Oh, not yet. Everything in DeSci is still really early science. And, but if you're talking not in DeSci, honestly, I think that we're kind of the closest thing that there is to trying to do all of this. Right? We're trying to develop salutogenic therapies. We're trying to keep them as accessible as possible. We're trying to make sure that we can actually get these maybe I'll define accessible. That's so it's not ridiculously expensive and it's not, and it's actually available, not just to people who have the money, but all over the place, and something that is going to actually work. And, something that will not only work, but also be safe and safe to use. I mean, all of this, right? We're trying to be as open and transparent as we can in this entire process. To some extent, at one point I was even thinking about taking our entire drug development process, or I guess I shouldn't be saying drug anymore, our medical product process or development process, and involving people and showing how difficult it is to go through this whole process, what's being asked for, and where it doesn't make any sense in some situations. Now, it might for lots of other cryogenic drugs, but often it doesn't.
Yeah. It's like one of those things where it looks conceptually clear right now, and it looks like this is the model to be pursued, and we have a candidate for it. Now we have to just make or get people to motivate about this thing to pursue this path, and then see how it turns out. That's kind of where it goes to.
It is really exciting. I think this is a really exciting framework for how drug development and or therapeutic medicine development.
But obviously, I don't think it's a very optimistic view that U.S. government will say like, "Oh, entire FDA goes on blockchain," and that's probably not going to happen that quickly. Even though,
honestly, I think it's better put voting on blockchain. I mean, I do all of this stuff, right? The problem is, no one has enough confidence that they won't lose, right? Like, well, if I keep some of this stuff to where it's a little bit nebulous and no one can really check my numbers really well, then I can always fudge them a little bit. Well, you can't do that on a blockchain. Yeah. Everything's out there. You can't go back and change it. That's the way they're built, unless you've got a big glitch. But I'm assuming that we could fix that by not having all sorts of loopholes all over the place. Make it pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Well, this has been a good primer in this on this topic, especially on DeSci, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more in detail, specific steps, hopefully, how you're going to implement this for Eyeball potentially. And one of the things I'm curious is to now dig into what other projects similar to Eyeball are already listed or are in kind of like trying to pursue the similar path. And so we'll see if we can dig those and also see where those stand at this moment. And that will be a good, just to like maybe even create a place for these all projects we can see looking into and see where they're going with.
Yeah, honestly, comparatively, some of them are silly. It's I don't know. On one hand, we feel so far ahead that one of our concerns was, well, can we engage with a place that really is wanting to focus almost exclusively on early science? But I think the answer is yeah. I think we can, because there's plenty of early science we could go back and start doing. Right? We developed an approved product before really understanding microimmune dynamics underneath it. What exactly why and how it is working. All we knew at the time was it was working.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, you are way ahead. It's already, manufactured in a different country, and there is proof points to that, more evidence. It's not just the research based funding here. It's actually just the, I would say, like the production side of stuff. How do you get to production in the US? That's where it's at.
Yeah. And we're willing to, to open all of that up and share the upside with others. Most pharmaceutical companies aren't willing to do that. I mean, I guess they are if you buy their stock, but not in a way where they're basically turning around and saying, "Yeah, we'll go ahead and let somebody else control what we are going to do with our IP."
Yeah.
We're willing to do that.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Once again, thanks for bringing the insight, especially of this is a really, I would say, new, but not that new. It's been around. It's just that it hasn't made that much progress on the blockchain as we would have liked, especially in healthcare world. And but this has been really insightful. And once again, thanks for taking the time and sharing all the insights once again with and also connecting the dots from how you are trying to take eyeball with this DeSci as a whole concept for kind of governance to ownership. That's what I want to say this. So thanks again. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.